while I kind of kill some time while you all are settling in, talking with our altar guild director, Christy Brewer, and the church's ministry, the church's made a decision to buy a few furnishings to kind of beautify the space, replacing some things that are getting worn out. None of the worn out ones are really here. But that got us thinking about maybe we'll do a short Advent series, because we're only doing, I think, 3 Sundays of Sunday school on a short theology of worship, like our principles of worship and beauty, and then very short on like, what are all these things called? Where do they come from? Why do we have them? And it's kind of, we beautify, but I don't want you to see it as completely foreign as if it is not your own. I don't want to say demystify, because what we do in worship is very mystical. However, I want it to be yours, if that makes sense. One of the things that's really neat about Anglican is you come into an inheritance and even a world, like a shared life that has names for things, and we do things together in service on Sunday, and I do things, and I'm wearing things that I don't, most people don't walk down the street looking like this. These are technically my street clothes. And that's what these are. They're not a special vestment. And we can decide, like, how did that happen? How did that happen? And so I thought that would be a useful thing to kind of say, what's going on in the service? What are we saying with these things? Where do they come from? Sometimes there's a strong theology behind them. Sometimes it's like candles you need to see in a dark room. But then you come with the theology later. Well, it's the light of the world, the light of Christ. And it does simplify, and we can go through all of that. Does that make sense? So that'll start next Sunday. And I hope it'll be helpful. I think we'll start with what's called the normative principle of worship. There's a big argument between the regulative and normative principle of worship in the Reformation period. And it explains some things that kind of still exist today. And we'll go on down from there. Kind of what's our theology of worship and regarding visual things, physical things, articles that we use and various activities, and maybe even get to some of the furniture, particularly the table/altar, maybe the pulpit and lectern as well. But does that make sense? Okay.
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
Why do we call ourselves Reformed Episcopal Church? And it happened in the 18th century.
Right. It happened in the 19th century because there was a Protestant Episcopal Church that a large group thought was drifting in theology and practice, and they left in concern over that, and we're going to get back on mission and reform the church alongside that. Now, when people say reform now, everybody thinks something very specifically theological, which is no, it's just the Reformation. Calvinism. They think specifically Presbyterianism, Calvinism, Dutch Reform, 5 points, Dort, that. I don't know if you knew that. If you get outside the church, when people say reform, it's like, oh, it means completely Calvinist and Calvinist only. We certainly do incorporate and include Calvinism. It can be allowed, but the main thrust of that change was about getting the Protestant Episcopal Church back on track. So it was reforming it, getting it back in the form it was supposed to be, what was kind of promised at the beginning of the founding of the Protestant Episcopal Church. That's why that name was chosen in 1873. Nowadays, when you say something's reformed, in Christianity, it usually means Calvinist only. And that's not what we mean when we call ourselves Reformed Episcopalians. Although we have plenty of folks that are reformed theologically in terms of our members and clergy. Does that make sense a little bit? Okay. Any other questions before we hop into the wisdom list? Good. By the way, it's interesting, English-speaking Protestantism, when it comes to the United States, usually labels itself, at least at first, based on their differing views of church government. Episcopalian Presbyterian, Congregationalist. Those are all church government structures that you can't have two at the same time, right? You have to choose one. And so New England, Congregationalist, the congregation is in charge, one elder maybe, or other elders. Presbyterian, the presbyters, what we call priests, the elders. There's ruling elders and preaching elders. Episcopalian, you have three orders of pastors. You have the episkopos, the overseer, the bishop, episkopos, biscop, bishop, presbyter, prester, priest, and then diakonos, deacon. That's the different governing. And it's interesting, when the colonial period starts, the three founding church families, except for Rhode Island, are named for their church government structure. They're all English-speaking Protestants. And they have other theology differences. But the big one that you can't have both congregational government and Presbyterian government. You literally can't. You got to do one or the other, because you got to constitute yourself. So you can't be a monarchy and a constitutional republic, can you? That's the same kind of difference I'm talking about. Constitutional difference. Sorry to go in on that. But yeah.
So I know from history that the church that was first instituted in the United States was the Anglican Church. In fact, that was a state government or whatever.
Yeah, part of it. It was the colonial.
Become Episcopal?
After the Revolutionary War.
Oh, okay.
And then we got our own bishops that didn't have to swear fealty to the King of England. That was a crisis, actually. Because the way we do things, the bishop lays hands for confirmation and for ordination. It slowed our planting until we said, hey guys, bishops in England, can we be just church tied to you and not civil law tied to you, political? And they were very hesitant, right? Nobody wants to change anything. It's like, listen, we have your same theology, the prayer book, we want to do all that, but we can't make our clergy swear fealty to the King of England because they're American clergy now. And it was a big to-do to get bishops that didn't have to do that. If you want to do church history again sometime, I'm glad to do that. It's a fascinating history. Anyway, let's go to Proverbs 8 through 11. 15, 8 through 11, excuse me.
The sacrifice of the wicked is an abomination to the Lord, but the prayer of the upright is his delight. The way of the wicked is an abomination to the Lord, but he loves him who follows righteousness. Harsh discipline is for him who forsakes the way, and he who hates correction will die. Hell and destruction are before the Lord, so how much more the hearts of the sons of men. All
right. First of all, what does God think of religiosity expressed by wicked men? Right, it's abomination. You find lots of the prophets, the minor prophets in particular, really... Actually, the major prophets too. I hate your sacrifices and your new moon festivals. Not because God hates those festivals, but because you're such an utter hypocrite. You go, oppress the poor in the morning and show up with your sacrifices. Oh, Lord God. It's always ugly. And it was ugly in Jesus' day. It was ugly in the Old Testament. Solomon agrees. Solomon agrees with that. Next, how are the foolish, especially great evildoers, to be treated? Thinking in terms of verse 10.
Harsh discipline.
Yeah. Those that do great evil do need harsh discipline. Those that have really blown it, you don't slap them on the wrist. Why? Why would that have to... Why does this proverb have to exist? A lot of times people naturally say, of course they did something grievous. Of course they should be brought to account. What's the monkey wrench that can be thrown into that? Now, this is written to a prince, a young son of a king. Right? This is Solomon's son. And this is for anybody who wants to exercise dominion. Why would people not do that? It seems so natural.
It might be above the law.
What? Tell me more.
If they're in a position to be above the law.
Well, put it in this sense. What if the prince has to be the one to bring the judgment down, so he's above the person that's in trouble? right, that's really blown it. He has to be the one, in a sense, with the switch in his hand.
So you can't spare the rod.
You can't spare the rod. So let's get that's the child one.
Right.
So, why does a prince need to be reminded when someone does a great evil that just won't stop being evil? You need to bring harsh discipline.
Well, it may be easier to turn a blind eye to the
Yes.
sin or to try and please people so that you're more lenient than you should be.
Yes. Yes. Old buddy system. Crookedness. Corruption. Turning a blind eye because it's easier to deal with than to go through the unpleasantness and stress. By the way, do you need handouts? Anybody need handouts? The unpleasantness and stress that I don't want to deal with, right? This is, think in terms, if you're the one who has to mete out the discipline, you need to do it. Why?
So they'll learn.
So what?
So they'll learn.
So they'll learn. What else? Because God says there's like a cosmic thing, right? Where God's righteousness has to be, in a sense, satisfied or honored.
Well, if it's strong enough, it might be enough to cause them to not do it again.
Yes, that's the teaching. That's the correction.
It acts as a deterrent.
It acts as a deterrent. And finally, there are victims.
Justice.
There's justice. There does need to be justice for victims. Whether it's false accusation, whether it's something you've really done, a predator. I mean, think of a great evil doing. Don't think of like Timmy stole a cookie out of a cookie jar and now you're going to lash him 40 lashes, save one. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about really big, nasty things. And a prince will have to deal with. Right? And we see there's a problem of womanly men in authority because when a big problem comes up, they shirk from wanting to be the bad guy to bring judgment and justice upon people who have hurt other people grievously. Right? That was church scandals. This often happens. Right? This is the one that gets all the press because it's hypocritical for the church to preach certain morality and then people don't do it and infringe upon it and hurt people badly, and then the church is like, well, just slap on the wrist, whatever. And we do need to be merciful, but there are people that will take advantage of that too. And you need, if you're going to be a wise exerciser of dominion, you need to stand against that. Now, how does the person, often if they're a real bad egg, how do they respond to that? Everybody's going, tell me some things. Tell me some dynamics. Tell me some lies and excuses evildoers give to not be given what's justly to them, even though that's the right thing to do, considering who's going to get hurt, who needs to get deterred, who justice needs to be given out, and you're a pathological. By the way, let's add pathological in there where they don't stop. There's a consistent pattern of behavior after having been corrected. What are they going to say to squirm out of it?
Somebody else's fault.
Blame other people, circumstances, environment. Good. Blame game, shift the blame. That's Garden of Eden, isn't it? The woman thou gavest me.
It's not fair.
It's not fair. Play ignorance, play the victim. It's amazing how people can weaponize the victim mindset because they're the good guy now, right? Automatically we have this. It's interesting. It's kind of a corrupted version of Christianity where you pick the little guy, and then that's been put into something like whenever you're the weaker party, you're the one in the right. And that's not necessarily the case. What else?
Everybody's
People
doing it.
fool themselves and say, well, it doesn't apply to me.
Doesn't apply to me. What else?
Everybody's doing it.
Everybody's doing it.
Oh, wow.
And I'm the one who got my hand caught stuck in the cookie jar. The other one is, well, God teaches us to forgive. You need to give me mercy because you're a Christian.
And judge not.
Judge not!
Yeah.
Right? And that's not what that verse is about. And again, I want you to see kind of, I'm saying it's not Tommy with his hand in the cookie jar. This is something much more grievous. All right? Makes sense? Makes
One
sense.
other element of why it's necessary to do it is that it's an element of keeping order and maintaining order and
Yes.
the safety of society.
Because if you're exercising dominion, and you want to, what Caesar should want to do, if he's like, it's like, God, what do you want me to do? Right? he should try as to best reflect as he can the righteousness of the city of God and the city of man. Because Caesar runs the city of man. God runs the city of God, the Lord Jesus Christ. But it's nice when you can accurately, as best you can, reflect. Bring righteousness and justice. Thou shalt not steal. Thou shalt not murder. Right? And it'll try to align with what God would like. What's he like, what's he dislike. And it's not just what God happens to like. It's actually what is good. Right? It's objectively what is good. And it's found and proceeds from God and should be returned to him. And that's good. There's an order. One of the first things God does is bring order by the power of his word. Separating things, limiting things. And that's not a bad thing. Chaos is the bad thing. It destroys. And is disorder. Make sense? Yes, ma'am.
In regard to what was just said about judgment, there's a trend today to say, I'm not judgmental.
Right.
I don't want to be judgmental.
Right. And we've internalized that.
Be judged.
We've internalized that.
Yes.
And it keeps us from actually fulfilling responsibilities we need to fulfill. I'll brag on, actually it's not him, but Brian Gibbs' son Josh teaches at a Christian school. And a lot of his he writes articles, especially on teaching. And one of his great knacks is blowing through evangelicalese, excusing bad child rearing, bad life decisions, bad teaching, bad habits that are defended and excused, and basically indulging things you shouldn't indulge as a teacher, as a school, and I think, as a parent, a pastor, whatever. And one of his great things is like, people, when they often will give their things about not wanting correction, they are very good at using religious language to give an excuse for it. And, I kind of became an Anglican because I was sick of evangelicalese, I call it that. This spiritualese language that's actually used to do things that, are foolish or wrong or whatever. And, that's just in the water right now. People very spiritual but not very religious, and that's one of the dangers we have to navigate, is kind of have to cut through the fog, the horse manure, unfortunately. You got to cut through it because people are dishonest with themselves sometimes and dishonest with others when they don't want to face consequences. That actually, if they do face it, in the long run, everybody will be better for it. Yes, sir.
That's the problem with a lot of the so-called church schools in this area.
Yeah.
They're not Christian schools.
They aren't.
They call themselves a church school of blah, 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 but they're not Christian schools.
Yeah, and it's really interesting. And then when the fight comes, when it's something unpleasant, they're ready to fold because they've done 1,000 compromises up to that point, and they're in no place to stand. Unfortunately, it's sad. It's sad, and it's a lot of drift. Yeah.
Well, in the case of parents that want to be friends with their children,
Yeah.
or people that aren't being
Well,
strong leaders.
and you think of the prince wanting to be friends with the fellow lords and rulers of his realm. You want that as a leader. You want a good relationship. And it's the old buddy thing.
But it's giving power to that person, and so that person doesn't then
Right.
look to authority or...
Right. Parent, what were both you and I talking about? I was talking about political kings with, say, dukes, counts, the lords of Israel, the guys that are under Solomon, right? And parents to kids, what are we talking about? Hierarchy. Hierarchy and order, which again is a very dirty word in our society, especially democracy society. The people use the language of democracy and equality to undermine that, and it's always been a danger. I mentioned last week Washington Irving as an Episcopalian. He got a great book called The American Democrat. Not about the party, but the idea of everything's about the demos, what people say. I had the wrong author. It's James Fenimore Cooper, right? The Last of the Mohicans. He has a great little snag that I was reading. People say can be used to justify just about anything, can it? And he was talking about this is one of the great dangers of living in a small d democracy like America is. And he saw it around him in the early 1800s. Avail yourself of that wisdom. Because it's still around us. How dare you tell me, ... Because, like I said, wisdom, good judgment, is going to be construed as what? in an foolish, egalitarian, little d democratic society. Snobbery. Right? You're a Pharisee. Why? Because you said something religious. You're judging me, like in the way Jesus said not to. Why? Because you just exercised some moral discernment. You think you're better. You think listening to Bach is better than Britney Spears. Yes, it is. But they'll treat you like a snob. How dare you say that? And I'm like, well, sorry, can't. You have to get a callus. You don't want to be calloused, but you need to get used to being called a snob. No, I'm not going to stuff my mouth with Cheetos every day. Real home-cooked food is better. How dare you say that? Yes, I just did. I'm going to say it again, but you didn't hear me the first time. You got to kind of get... It takes some courage to express and live out wisdom now. That I don't think is always the case in other societies and times. Yes, ma'am?
Well, what they're doing now, they're not so much saying it's snobbery, but what's in the media is that it's a kind of racial supremacy.
Yeah, or lots of other supremacy, religious supremacy,
good
whatever.
Grammar, good manners. I've read all this where it's reported that is a sign of a certain racial supremacy, and that you're being in that category if you use good grammar.
You're educated.
Or it's the same thing with a classic school saying, you could read the latest young adult novel, fiction, whatever, or you're going to read Last of the Mohicans. Guess which one's better, objectively? But they're saying, well, it's it's this thing. It's like, I'm not saying it because whatever the skin color of the author is, it's because the qualities of the work,
exactly,
right, is better. It's better for you. It's better for you to read Jane Eyre than it is for you to watch whatever's on TV right now, right? And how dare you say that? It's like, it's bad for children to be watching a lot of screen time. It's foolish to give them a tablet, whatever. And they're like, how dare you say that? I don't care, right? At this point, you got to get... And some of it, sometimes you can't just immediately, like at a party, you've met someone, you don't want to cut them off right away, but you also kind of have in the back of your mind, as for me and my house, right? That's what I really want you to get. For me and my house, we're not going to do that. For me and my house, we're going to serve the Lord. All right. What's the practical takeaway of verse 11? So Solomon has said this, or he's sharing it with us from his readings and collecting of Proverbs. What is the practical takeaway of that? It seems like just a fact, right? God judges the dead, those that are in Sheol, those that are in hell. Sheol, hell means covered place. We're not talking about lake of fire. We're talking about the grave in general. Where all the realm of the dead. So death and Sheol are before the Lord. He knows when people die, how they're going to die, where they stand with Him. So He's a wise judge, and He sees it all. And then what else? How much more so? So He sees what's in your heart. So, okay, that's a fact. What's the takeaway? What's the prescription? What is Solomon instructing us?
To do everything to make our hearts for God.
Yeah, it's this understanding of living in fear of the Lord. Like, listen, take heed to your conduct, what you think, take heed to your heart. What is going on in there? And God isn't swayed by bluster, right? And therefore live in the fear of God and reverence to Him and be honest with Him and therefore your neighbor too, right? If you've defrauded your neighbor, God knows it, and therefore, what do? You need to make it right with your neighbor. All right.
I think when you know the Word, then the more we're in His Word, we know.
Then you know what He wants. Yeah, we know what He wants.
So we want to speak the truth in love, but we probably need to live the truth in love too.
Yes. It's being the real McCoy.
Yes.
It's a lot of this has been about. It's the same thing with that verse 8. Be the real McCoy. Don't offer sacrifices when you're living a life of wickedness. It's ugly and it's foolish. Yeah, Brad.
I was just going to say, you can be obedient, but if your intent, your heart is still wrong, that obedience is for nothing.
Right, and so it's a lifelong thing to really keep attending to that, and it's by God's grace we can. But that's the way. This is the way. Any other thoughts before we go to 12 and 17? Let's go to 12, 17. Who wants to read that?
In verse 11, my translation says Sheol and Abaddon. What is Abaddon?
Destruction. Destruction. Think of the kind of shakeup that happens when empires fall. Is that making sense? When people's projects, especially if it's a really arrogant project, comes to shambles. Have you ever read that story about when Henry Ford, I think, was still in charge, and he tried to build kind of a utopia Ford factory in the jungles of South America or Central America? Things like that. Really silly. The Oneida Commune. Your Oneida flakes come from a cult, or not anymore, but the Oneida community started there. It's actually named after a Native American group, but they started a commune. Things like this, Shakers. These things that just it comes to nothing. And Abaddon, destruction, bringing things to an end. And it's like that demon in Pilgrim's Progress, right? The demon Pilgrim fights is Abaddon, right? Destruction. Our own soul's destruction, right? It's the existential fight. I love Pilgrim's Progress on some days, and other days I'm like, there are better things. But you can't forget Abaddon, right? This very kind of scary thing. Death and hell, and Abaddon, death and destruction, hell and destruction, are very scary. And God's sovereign over them. He's not scared one bit. Therefore, and he knows the hearts of men. Who do you fear? I think a lot of people do foolish things and do evil things because they're afraid of things they shouldn't be afraid of and aren't afraid enough of God. Right? I'm scared of what they can do to my body or my reputation or my finances or my family. And what does Jesus say? Don't fear those that can throw your body prisoner, kill the body, but he that can throw the body and soul into hell. It's priorities. And so this actually gives you the courage by which to act upon wisdom.
It's secular fear versus spiritual fear.
Exactly. Secular fear is very Darwinian, right? I just got to survive. I got to make it. Or my offspring's got to make it. But mostly me. And then you don't have any courage from that. You have desperation maybe and a lot of unethical activity because it's a bunch of rats in a hole trying to get to the top and only one can get to the top. Christian's courage sees something beyond that I'm going to live righteously and I'm going to live boldly and courageously because guess what? God's got this. He's given me a guidance on where to go and I'm safe with him in the ultimate scheme of things. Does that make sense? Yeah. Good. Good question. That helped really clarify some things, didn't it? The Proverbs invite us to meditate upon them. We're taking our time through the Proverbs because they're meant to be chewed over. And you think if several young guys were reading this and thinking about it together, that's kind of what we're doing, right? Like, what about that? Yes, that's what the Proverbs are inviting for us to think together about wisdom. So we can live it, we can have it. Verse 12 through 17.
A scoffer does not love one who corrects him, nor will he go to the wise. A merry heart makes a cheerful countenance, but by sorrow of the heart the spirit is broken. The heart of him who has understanding seeks knowledge, but the mouth of fools feeds on foolishness. All the days of the afflicted are evil, but he who is of a merry heart has a continual feast. Better is a little with the fear of the Lord than great treasure with trouble. Better is a dinner of herbs where love is than a fatted calf with hatred.
Good. Yeah, everybody. Yeah, we'll get there. Again, let's start with 12. We find unteachableness or scoffing, right? They don't accept instruction from wise people when they get it, and they don't even seek it out. And they try to avoid it. Solomon, of course, invites us to love those who are wise, which are often the sort of people who will tell us true things that we don't want to hear at the moment. right? You want to start being wise, you need to start having your feelings less hurt and be angry against people that have corrected you, and instead be thankful that they are speaking some truth to you when a lot of the others, whether other people are speaking foolishness. Scoffers aren't like that. They say, how dare you? And they make fun of you, and they try to make light of you to dismiss. And by you, I mean a wise person. I'm thinking particularly in terms of even parents, right? Are you going to listen to Tommy, or are you going to listen to mom and dad, right? Well, Tommy's an idiot. But you like what Tommy has to say, and you're proud, and you're being arrogant against your family, so you're going to listen to Tommy, and guess what? You're going to be the one with the black eye, and then it goes on through life. Love people who correct you and bring wisdom. That's what Solomon's saying. And it's hey, you have to be humble to do that. I have something else to learn. That's okay. And it's especially nice to do that when you're young. Put yourself under that yoke early, and it will pay dividends later on. So that makes sense too. Yeah. People who do, follow like a season of sin, especially in their youth, when they come, if they repent and come back to the church, often what they feel is a ruin of wasted time and opportunity. And you don't want that for someone you love, and you give them the best truth you can there.
And therein is wisdom when you have children.
Yes.
Say, okay, so.
Yes, let me tell you about the time that.
Tell you what not to do.
Yeah. Yeah, and I remember those talks. Like, this is what you don't do, this is what you do, right? You need that. Moving on, I think we're at 13 and 14. Yes, 13. Can feelings be revealed on the outside via body language and facial expression? Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
How do our feelings affect others? Right? I am very bad with a poker face. What's the practical takeaway from this, though? What's the practical takeaway?
Be aware of how you impact others.
So, attend to your own face. That's what I would be. What's the other thing?
Be authentic. Because if you're not authentic, it's going to show in your face.
Right. Also think of Prince. So, Prince, say the Prince has a poker face. What's going to help him, though? What's going to help him, like, if you're a loving parent, or a good pastor, or a good friend?
Show your...
I'm telling you to flip it around the script a bit. Who's doing what? Pay attention to other people. I'm dense, but at least sometimes I can tell when something's off. And then what do? You ask them, hey, what's going on, right? I mean, husbands learn this. When she's banging in the, she's putting away the dishes, but with a digression that's not normal. You're like, hey, sweetie, what's going on, right? Why do we have to be told that? Think again who the original audience is.
Males.
Get them out. Young males. Yeah. I think young people in general, but a young man needs to know this. Don't be aware of others, and be aware that body language is a thing. And actually, if you care about people, if they're your counselors, if they're on your team, so to speak, what do? You come alongside them, right? If you're going to be a leader, you need to be doing that. If you're going to be a good husband, right? Maybe or a good wife, right? They need some time, maybe, to bang around. That's what sometimes Dad would just go, level set, just do some chores, bang around the garage, chills out, changes the oil, whatever he needed to do, comes back in, he's accomplished something productive. Let's go back to the problem. Let's talk through it. Everybody has a different process, but you will know a little bit about what that is as you get to know the person because you pay attention to them. What's the other thing you could do? If you want to ignore this, what are you going to do and why? If you want to ignore what Solomon has said, why would you ignore it and how would that manifest itself? So you want to take this foolish way, what are you going to do?
Not address it.
Not address it. Pretend it's not there, and if you have a guy who's obviously really angry, Are you going to bring him, something else to make him angrier? Probably not, Dumbo, right? If someone's sad, are you going to add another sad thing or whatever? Tear into them, whatever. No, right? Why would you do that, though? Why would you say somebody's obviously very, has a broken spirit, and you say something to not be a salve or help in any way, be productive at all, but...
Is that back to the fathers don't exasperate their children?
I think that's part of it. It's like, if you're a dad, you have to apply this to your kids. Well, let's get to this. What is the this? You can be self-absorbed, and you cannot care. It's like, oh, it's just me and my little world, right? Isn't that often where we are as young people? Yeah, like we're in our little world. And Solomon's like, you gotta get out of that little world. You're surrounded by neighbors. You're surrounded by others. Open your eyes. Look outward a little bit. And we need to be told that. Because a lot of foolishness can result from not doing this. Make sense? Yeah, it's a pride thing again, isn't it? I'm the center of the universe. I don't care where other people are in this universe. That's what I think is being taught there. What are you drawn to? Understanding or foolishness? That's verse 14, I believe. Verse 15 has a lot to do with attitude and outlook, doesn't it? What does that mean? What does verse 15 mean? So life's tough. You have a lot of bad days in life. But they don't have to be all bad.
Half empty or half full.
Yeah, it has a lot to do with perspective. You can, if you have, what is it? We're in 15. All the days of the afflicted are evil, but he is of a merry heart. If you have a merry heart, you have a continual feast. Kind of like, where's D on your automatic, right? And if it's merry heart, right, a good outlook, you don't have to inflict more misery upon yourself, right? That's just very common. And it's just like you just kind of need to know that, right? The glass half empty or half full. It really can make a difference. Verse 16 through 17. Verse 16 and 17 demand that we reevaluate what is actually important and worthwhile. Virtue with economic poverty is better than vice or neighborly contempt with riches. I say neighborly contempt because that seems to be, it's like everybody's eating really well, there's a lot on the table, but everybody is at each other's throats. There's actually several good books, and there's some movies too, where you have all these people, they're like the lords and ladies of the area, they're the upper crust of society, they're in their tuxedos, they're in their white ties, but they hate each other's guts. And it's usually like a murder mystery, right? Like all these upper crust people, they have everything they could ever want. They can snap their fingers, the butler brings whatever they want, and their life is hell. Why? Because they have great contempt all for each other and just terrible people to each other. Listen, you can have all that money in the world. If I could have, some domestic peace and a salad at night, and that's all I get, I'll take the salad. I don't care what the bird or the roast is that night. You can't pay me enough to want to go through that, right? And that's what that's Solomon says. Like, it's the salad with the righteous live, the good life, right? The good life, you don't have to buy it, right? There's no price tag on the good life because that's not where the good life comes from. It comes from wisdom. So it's better to have the salad and the good life, which is, in a sense, I would say your dignity in the moral sense, right? You've not lived in great evil and scratching and scraping, and also maybe I think a domestic concord's there. Husband and wife together seeking a righteous life. Listen, that better is the herbs in that than having a 7-course meal where everybody hates each other, and a lot of times all the hatreds come from doing each other wrong. Right? That's what happens with these murder mysteries. You find this guy did this to this, and this person was selfish and did this, right? That's where that has to come from. And Solomon's saying, which one you choose? Choose the lower paycheck and the good life if you have to, right? Make sense? Okay. Verse 18 through 28.
A wrathful man stirs up strife, but he who is slow to anger always allays contention. The way of the lazy man is like a hedge of thorns, but the way of the upright is a highway. A wise son makes a father glad, but a foolish man despises his mother. Folly is joy to him who is destitute of discernment, but a man of understanding walks uprightly. Without counsel, plans go awry, and in the multitude of counselors they are established, but in the multitude. A man has joy by the answer of his mouth, and a word spoken in due season, how good it is. The way of life winds upward for the wise, that he may turn away from hell below. The Lord will destroy the house of the proud, but he will establish the boundary of the widow. The thoughts of the wicked are an abomination to the Lord, but the words of the pure are pleasant. He who is greedy for gain troubles his own house, but he who takes bribes will live. He who hates bribes will live. The heart of the righteous studies how to answer, but the mouth of the wicked pours forth.
All right, I'm going to go through quickly. I think most of these are straightforward. Strife and anger, return is a theme. Again, you want concord and peace. Yourself and for the people you make your counselors. Right? They got to get along if you can. And be wise in how they conduct themselves with each other. Laziness is a moral problem and it breeds misery. Relationships to our elders are revealed in wisdom and folly. Right? Have counselors. Run it by some folks and have the kind of folks you can look to receive good counsel. Right? Have counselors. The tongue can be a source of blessing, not just affliction. We see again that the wise follow a certain path and avoid folly and death. What does verse 25 reveal about God? 25. The Lord will destroy the house of the proud, establish the poor of the widow. God does take sides based upon his justice, no matter how high someone stands in terms of social station. Right? The border of the widow, that's your property line, your inheritance. Like, if you transgress that and hurt someone who's on the weak end, weak part of society, she's vulnerable, right? She's a widow, especially in that society. And the easy route is to favor someone else who can do you a favor and do injustice to someone and really do wrong to them to get in good with someone who, is corrupt. You're corrupt now too. And God is not to be mocked. Right? Young prince. Stand up for what's right no matter where someone stands in society. This poor widow, guess what? God's for her if she's in the right. Right? He's going to destroy the house of the wicked, including the person who tries to take advantage of this poor widow. God will take care of him, if not you. The least you can do is side to her, on her side, if she's in the right. Does that make sense? Again, we see that God sees and knows everything, so live accordingly in fear. Greed is destructive, not only to ourselves, but also to our family. Never take a bribe. By the way, why do people take bribes? What did they fail to think through?
Then it could be never ending. I mean,
Yes. Never ending. There's never ending path there. Your whole career seems besmirched by that. You're not a place to find justice. And think about that with a ruler. Right? Think of regimes where corruption and bribery are regular. They're unstable. Because you don't know if you're going to get righteous there or not, so you don't trust and you don't give loyalty to it. I mean, why fight for that? Right? You want to have a good rule. How do righteous people behave, especially versus the wicked?
They walk tall.
They seek wisdom.
Yes. All right. Do you guys want to try to finish up this section? I think it would only take a minute. Yeah, and then we'll hop into our series for Advent next when we come meet again. The Lord is far from the wicked, but he heareth the prayer of the righteous. The light of the eyes rejoiceth the heart, and the good report maketh bones fat. What does that mean? Just think about that, what that would mean. The ear that heareth the reproof of life abideth among the wise. He that refuseth instruction despiseth his own soul, but he that heareth reproof getteth understanding. The fear of the Lord is the instruction of wisdom, and before honor is humility. That's review, right? You see this refrain. Humility opens the path to wisdom and exaltation in time. Fear of the Lord is that beginning of wisdom. Those who do not fear the Lord are not humble but proud. Now, what's the practical takeaway of verse 29? How does it play out in real life? Think about people who've lived foolishly and despised piety facing a crisis. Right? If you've been foolish and wicked all your days, and then it's like a ninth inning, seventh inning, ninth inning, it's like a Hail Mary sort of thing. It's like, that's rough. It's just, and it's like, what standing do we have here? What are you resorting to? What now that things are there? For a saint, prayer is not your last resort, it's your resort. It's your first resort, it's your middle resort, and it's your last resort. And a lot of people aren't that way, right? We want to be the kind of wise people. Prayer is our first resort and everything in between. What does verse 30 mean? What an odd phrase. And I had to dig around on that one. Let me tell you what I found. One is that it's the light of the eyes, referring to the radiant face of a friend. So the two lines of the proverb will be speaking of the heartwarming effect that persons and facts respectively can bring. Or the clear brightness of one's own eye cannot be meant, for the brightness of the eyes of others that meet us. So it has to do with someone we are happy to see, and also by extension, good news. Now, look at that, verse 30. Light of the eyes rejoices the heart, good report makes the bones fat. So that's a good report, an encouraging news, a fact that's come known to you, that's helping you. Why is that here? Why does a young man who could possibly be a ruler need to know this?
Well, he's ruler over all ages of people.
Yes.
So even though he's young, he's going to be among...
Right.
And I do think, especially today, our countenance, goodness gracious, we don't even have to say anything. But there are so many ill-humored countenances.
Oh, that's true. It's like...
we can make a difference just in a small way.
You think of someone, say it's a granddaughter, hits teenage years. She can pursue a way of foolishness or a way of wisdom. The way of wisdom would be, Grandma, I'm so glad to see you. I want to spend time with you, listen to you, telling me about stories, whatever. Or what's another way you can be? Really surly. Right? It's like, hi, Grandma. Whatever, however the people behave. That's, don't you want to bring health to your grandmother's bones, to her marrow? Don't you want to be a consolation? That's one way you can take it. Another way is it's one of those hard facts of life a young man won't come to appreciate until he's older and has lived some life. Listen, son, when you're older, just hearing some good news will make your day. If you're waiting for a piece of news to happen, will this stock go up? Will this sale go on? Was this army defeated? Is this troop coming in? Did this ambassador pull off his peace mission? Did the trade deal go through? And you'll think, why are people this way intense, and this is how they respond? Because, son, you just don't know the stakes yet. You haven't lived life yet. Same thing when you're an older person. Dad, why are we going 3-4 hours to meet this guy? Well, he's my best friend. Why are we setting up a block a week or whatever? Because friends are important. And he's my friend. He's my best good friend. And he brings joy to my heart, health to my bones. And I long to see him. Why do I go to this 10th reunions, right? Or the 20th, or, whatever. Why do these old people go into their high school reunion? Because they want to see each other. right? It seems very banal, but young people, it's a new feeling to them when they get to that point. And sometimes the Proverbs just say, this is out there, and it's going to happen. You're going to get old too one day. You're going to get to a point where you're really hoping for some good news, and you've never, you're going to be waiting in the waiting room in the doctor's office when your child's giving birth to the child, right? Or think of Looney Tunes, at least. These days, they put you in there, but, you think of the Looney Tunes for the husband smoking the cigarette. You're going to be waiting for some good news too one day, and you just need to understand what's happening. But I also think the same way, right? Make the thought at the time. You can make someone's day. An old friend, if you're passing through, say you're traveling through, is like, hey, I want to drop by and see you. Right? That takes, getting out of your little universe and thinking about someone else to get into theirs, because you could actually make each other's day. Or whatever. Or share some good news with someone. Not to make envy, but to encourage them. These are little things I think that I'm not always good at. And I think these are cultural things that can easily be forgotten or ignored. We just kind of get stuck in the rut, in the little tunnel, in our little, our little cocoon of, here's my virtual media world, and here's my workplace, and I just travel back and forth between the two, and I kind of isolate myself off. And so really it becomes very easily as a young person to get stuck in that cocoon, and it's kind of countercultural to break out of that. It's like, I need to go see someone. I need to keep up with them. I need to give him a call. I think that might be a proper application of this verse. Last 3 verses uphold humility, including a willingness to be corrected as a key to wisdom and blessing. That's all I had to share or think about. I ran a little late. Any other thoughts? All right, let's pray. Father, we thank you for the wisdom of your word. We ask that it would be upon our hearts, our lips, and in our lives as we go through this next week. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.
Thank you.